Lee Van Cleef truly hated him more than anyone. Lee Van Cleef was born on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey. He was a famous actor who made movies for over 50 years. He became one of the most well-known faces in cowboy movies, which we call westerns. People mostly remember him for playing the bad guys, and he was really good at it. Van Cleef had a tough-looking face, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to look right through you. This made him perfect for playing cold, mean bad guys in many classic films. But his story is about much more than just being a villain. It's about never giving up, changing with the times, and becoming really great at what he did. Van Cleef grew up in the small town of Somerville, New Jersey. There, he learned about hard work and staying focused. His father fixed watches for a living and taught him to pay attention to small details and do things carefully. Van Cleef joined the U.S. Navy during World War II. He worked as a radio operator and saw real combat. The things he experienced during the war helped him later when he played tough, no-nonsense characters in movies. After the war ended, Van Cleef went to the University of South Carolina where he studied to become an engineer. But he soon felt pulled toward acting, so he moved to Hollywood to try to make it in show business. At first, he appeared in tiny roles that didn't even have his name listed in the credits. He often played soldiers, cowboys, or other small characters. It wasn't until director Sergio Leone noticed him that his career really started to take off. Van Cleef's Hollywood career started slowly with minor roles in films like High Noon in 1952. In that movie, he played a silent bad guy's helper with a scary presence. His thin, sharp-edged face meant he kept getting cast as villains, especially in westerns. His looks and attitude seemed perfect for playing ruthless, hardened outlaws. He played small, uncredited roles in films and TV shows throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. Slowly, he built up his reputation as a reliable character actor. However, even though he was in more and more movies, Van Cleef's career got stuck. He kept being given the same type of one-dimensional villain roles. He tried hard to break free from always playing the same kind of character. Personal problems, including health issues from a car accident, caused even more setbacks in his career. Van Cleef's big break came when he was cast as the ruthless gunslinger Angel Eyes in the 1966 film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This was part of the famous Dollars trilogy directed by Sergio Leone. Although Clint Eastwood starred as the iconic Man with No Name, it was Van Cleef's performance as the cold-blooded but skilled bounty hunter that really impressed audiences and critics. His performance had a chilling intensity that added layers of depth to the typical villain role. Van Cleef's distinctive look, his sharp cheekbones, angular face, and eyes that seemed to pierce through his opponents, made him a natural fit for playing the bad guy. His career was marked by many notable roles in other westerns. This included For a Few Dollars More in 1965, where he portrayed the cunning outlaw Colonel Douglas Mortimer. There was also The Big Gun Down in 1966, where he played a lawman turned hunter. In these films, his character as a man of few words but lots of action helped make him one of the great Western actors. Van Cleef's way of playing villains was never simple or flat. He brought seriousness and complexity to his roles that made his characters more than just simple bad guys. His characters were often driven by their own sense of right and wrong, even if it put them against the law or what society expected. In films like Death Rides a Horse in 1967 and Day of Anger in 1967, Van Cleef played aging gunslingers. Their wisdom and experience gave them a sense of sad dignity even though they lived outside the law. His ability to show both danger and weakness made him compelling to watch on screen. He became one of the genre's most beloved actors. Though he became a legend in westerns, Van Cleef's talents went beyond this type of movie. In the 1970s and 1980s, Van Cleef began to appear in more varied roles, including in action films and television. His distinctive voice and commanding presence made him a natural fit for roles in films such as Escape from New York in 1981, where he played the menacing character Hawk. There was also The Octagon in 1980, which paired him with martial artist Chuck Norris. His move into action films allowed him to reach a new generation of fans and showed his range as an actor. Van Cleef also appeared on numerous television series, including The Master in 1984. In that show, he played a martial arts expert alongside actor Timothy Van Patten. His presence in television gave him the opportunity to reach even more audiences. This solidified his status as a versatile actor capable of playing many different kinds of roles. Lee Van Cleef's personal life, while often overshadowed by his intense and memorable on-screen roles, was marked by several significant relationships, moments of tragedy, and devotion to his family. His first marriage to Patsy Ruth Cale in 1943 occurred during an important time in his life. Van Cleef, still a young man in his late teens and early 20s, was trying to balance his growing career and personal commitments. Patsy and Lee shared many years together, raising 3 children, Alan, David, and Deborah Van Cleef. Their family life, however, was probably challenging given Van Cleef's frequent absences because of his work in Hollywood. The unpredictable lifestyle of an actor can be really hard on a family. Their marriage eventually ended in divorce in 1958 after 15 years. This was a difficult time for Van Cleef, who also saw his career struggling at that point. Following his divorce from Patsy, Van Cleef entered a new chapter of his personal life when he married Joan Marjorie Drain in 1960. Van Cleef's relationship with Joan happened during a particularly interesting time in his career. After a series of supporting roles in westerns and a break following a car accident that almost ended his career, Van Cleef's luck began to improve. This was especially true after Sergio Leone cast him in the iconic spaghetti western For a Few Dollars More in 1965. His roles in these films dramatically changed his image in Hollywood. He went from being a reliable character actor to a leading man. Joan, who had been by his side during this transformative period, saw him rise to international fame. Yet the pressures of such a life were probably enormous. Despite their shared experiences during this key phase of his career, the couple divorced in 1974, ending a marriage that had lasted 14 years. Just 2 years later, in 1976, Van Cleef married Barbara Havlone. This relationship would last for the rest of his life. This third marriage seemed to offer Van Cleef some stability after the upheavals in his personal and professional lives. Barbara was with him during his later years when his health began to decline. Despite suffering from heart problems and ongoing complications from his past injuries, Van Cleef continued to work in the film industry throughout the 1970s and 1980s. However, these were less prominent roles than he had held during his peak years. Barbara remained a steadfast partner. And when Van Cleef passed away in 1989 due to a heart attack, she survived him. This marked the end of a 13-year marriage that saw Van Cleef's gradual exit from the spotlight. Van Cleef's personal life was also marked by a memorable accident that left a lasting physical reminder. He lost the last joint of his right-hand middle finger while building a playhouse for his daughter Deborah. This incident shows the actor's dual nature, a rugged, tough man on screen who was equally a devoted father in his private life. The loss of part of his finger did little to stop his acting career. In many ways, it added to his tough guy image. Viewers rarely noticed the missing joint as Van Cleef was good at hiding the injury in his performances. However, to those who worked closely with him, it became a part of who he was, a physical reminder of the personal sacrifices he made for his family. The injury itself probably required significant medical attention and recovery time. Yet, Van Cleef didn't allow it to stop him for long. He continued to work in Hollywood, showing his resilience and dedication to both his craft and his role as a father. Lee Van Cleef truly hated him more than anyone. The relationship between Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne was filled with tension and hatred that ran deeper than just professional rivalry. To someone watching from the outside, it might seem confusing that 2 iconic actors in the same genre would have such deep dislike for one another. However, behind the scenes, their differences in personality, politics, work ethic, and career path contributed to a lasting feud. Van Cleef, known for his sharp features and intense villainous roles in spaghetti westerns, was far from a fan of John Wayne. Wayne was the larger-than-life symbol of American westerns, often cast as the noble, rugged hero. This mutual dislike became a part of Hollywood legend, with the animosity between the 2 actors lasting for years and affecting their interactions within the film industry. One key factor contributing to Van Cleef's hatred for Wayne was their very different acting styles. Van Cleef was a method actor who deeply immersed himself in his roles. He was careful and detailed, often using a gritty, understated approach to play the morally complex characters for which he became famous. In contrast, John Wayne was known for playing basically the same archetypal character in many of his films, the strong, silent cowboy who upheld traditional values and embodied stoic masculinity. To Van Cleef, this type of acting lacked depth and complexity. He saw Wayne's reliance on his persona rather than versatility as a sign of laziness and arrogance. In Van Cleef's eyes, Wayne represented the shallow aspects of Hollywood. He was capitalizing on a larger-than-life image without putting in the necessary effort to expand his range as an actor. Political differences only served to deepen the divide between the two men. John Wayne was famously conservative, a strong supporter of right-wing causes, and an outspoken defender of American nationalism. He was a vocal supporter of the Vietnam War and played a leading role in advocating for traditional American values. He believed these were under threat in the rapidly changing social landscape of the 1960s and 70s. Lee Van Cleef, on the other hand, was more reserved about his political views, but he leaned more towards progressive ideals. He embraced the counterculture movement that criticized American imperialism and traditional values. Van Cleef reportedly found Wayne's political grandstanding distasteful. He viewed his unwavering support for militarism and conservatism as showing a narrow-minded worldview. To Van Cleef, Wayne's public persona seemed like an extension of the roles he played on screen. The unyielding, self-righteous cowboy, unable to see the complexities of the world beyond his own belief system. Their political opposition added a layer of personal resentment to their already tense professional relationship. Another contributing factor to their animosity was their very different approaches to fame and how they navigated their careers in Hollywood. John Wayne had achieved superstardom early on and maintained his A-list status throughout his career. He was beloved by audiences and seen as an American hero. This gave him a level of influence and control over his projects that few actors enjoyed. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had a more turbulent journey in the film industry. Early in his career, he was often cast in supporting roles as the villain, overshadowed by leading men like Wayne. It wasn't until he found success in the spaghetti westerns of the 1960s, particularly in Sergio Leone's films like For a Few Dollars More and The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, that Van Cleef finally received the recognition he deserved as a leading actor. Even then, his fame paled in comparison to Wayne's. Van Cleef resented the way Hollywood, dominated by stars like Wayne, had pigeonholed him for so long. He felt that actors like Wayne hogged the spotlight, leaving little room for others to break through. This fueled a deep-seated bitterness towards him. There were also more personal grievances between the two men stemming from their interactions off-camera. Van Cleef reportedly found Wayne to be pompous and domineering both on set and in social circles. Wayne's larger-than-life persona extended beyond his roles, and he was known for throwing his weight around in the industry. He often insisted on having things done his way. Van Cleef, who was more introverted and reserved in his personal life, despised this kind of brashness. He often avoided social gatherings where Wayne would be present. Stories from the set suggest that when the two did interact, the tension was obvious. Wayne was allegedly dismissive of Van Cleef's talents, seeing him as little more than a character actor who excelled in villainous roles but lacked the star power or charisma to be a leading man. This attitude infuriated Van Cleef, who felt that Wayne's success was more a product of luck and timing than raw talent.